Hi, everyone. Just one note that due to the size of the amount of people coming today, we had to update the Zoom information. So all of you that have found us here have that information. But if there's any colleagues or anyone you know that's having trouble getting in, maybe just give them the reminder in case the updates went to their spam. Thanks very much.
And for those of you who are calling in from time zones around the world, good evening and welcome to the Method Choice Community of Practice webinar on male contraceptive methods. I'm Trish McDonald at USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health and working on expanding contraceptive method choice across a full range of contraceptive methods. I hope you're all doing well and following those good public health guidelines to keep yourselves healthy and avoid catching and spreading the COVID-19 virus. It's wonderful to see so many having registered for the webinar. It just confirms how much interest there is in contraceptives for men. Near the end of 2019, we transitioned our community of practice on long-acting reversible contraceptives and permanent methods, affectionately known as LARCs and PMs, into a method choice community of practice. A couple of the hot topics that members expressed interest in knowing more about included What's New and Under Development, and Male Contraception. So today, the Evidence to Action Project is hosting both topics in one very interesting webinar. We have two incredible speakers today, which I'm sure you'll be very interested in hearing what they have to say. To get us started, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Roy Jacobstein. Dr. Jacobstein is IntraHealth International's Global Technical Lead for Family Planning. He's a public health physician who's worked on family planning and reproductive health in low-resource settings for over 3 decades. He has also served as an expert technical advisor for the development and updating of the World Health Organization's medical eligibility criteria for contraceptive use and the Family Planning, a global handbook for providers, and as an international reviewer of WHO's guidance subsequent to the ECHO trial. Among his many peer-reviewed papers is one advocating for vasectomy called The Kindest Cut, Global Need to Increase Vasectomy Availability, published in The Lancet. He's also documented many of the increases in the implant use across Africa. Before joining IntraHealth, Dr. Jacobstein served for 12 years as Medical Director of Engender Health and 13 years as Chief of the Communication Management and Training Division in USAID's Office of Population. Roy will be saying a few words, then introduce the speakers and moderate the question and answer period at the end. So Roy, over to you.
Thank you, Trish. And let me add my greetings. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you tuning in. As we all know, ensuring that people who seek contraception have a wide range of options is a bedrock principle in family planning programming. And there's been long-standing international consensus on the importance of gender equity. We also know that family planning programs in low-resource countries have notably expanded access to modern contraception. For example, according to PRB's 2019 data sheet, Ecuador, El Salvador, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe now have higher MCPR levels than Austria, and Kenya at 61% MCPR is only 2 percentage points behind. Colombia and Thailand, once beneficiaries of international family planning assistance, now have MCPRs higher than Canada's and 8% higher than the US's 68%. Countries in West and Central Africa with the lowest levels of use have doubled or tripled their MCPRs in the past decade, and contraceptive use there is continuing to rise. However, when we turn our focus to male contraception, the story is quite different. While there are 8 to 10 methods for women to choose from, there are only 2 modern methods of male contraception, condoms and vasectomy, and no long-acting reversible methods. This disparity between female methods and male methods in availability, access, and use is even more prominent in the lower resource countries where we work. For example, vasectomy is the most widely used modern method in Canada with 22% prevalence, which is 31% of all modern method use there. But in the world's 69 least developed countries, only 0.7% of women are protected by a partner's vasectomy. In the US, we have around 175,000 to 350,000 vasectomies provided every year, and in Africa, fewer than 100,000 men have accessed it. Vasectomy is the least known modern method in most low-resource countries, and awareness of it is often burdened by deep-seated myths and misunderstandings. And if a man does desire a vasectomy, skilled providers are generally unavailable to provide it. In short, for technological, socio-cultural, programmatic, and funding reasons, there has been a disconnect in the domain of male contraception between our stated commitments to method choice and gender equity and current realities in terms of both funding for male contraceptive development and ensuring availability and access for male contraceptive methods and programs. Work is ongoing on expanding male method options, however, and as Trish said in this webinar, we're fortunate to hear from 2 experts at the forefront of working to improve this situation. They are each going to present for about 15 minutes. We encourage you to ask questions or make comments in the chat box as they are speaking, and we'll have a brief Q&A after they share their prepared remarks. I've also just received words from our experts here that they're willing to stay an extra 15 minutes after the scheduled hour to continue our dialogue. We do understand not everyone will be able to stay, so rest assured the entire webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with you. So let's turn to our first presenter. Dr. Stephanie Page is head of the Division of Endocrinology and co-director of the University of Washington's Diabetes Institute. Dr. Page received her bachelor's degree from Stanford University and MD and PhD degrees from the University of Washington. She runs a large clinical research program focused on development of effective and reversible male hormonal contraceptives and has authored more than 100 peer-reviewed papers. She and her team collaborate with colleagues at UCLA's Lundquist Institute, the Population Council, and NICHD in these efforts with funding from NIH. So over to you, Dr. Page.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you all for joining us this morning, evening, or wherever you are in the world. Go ahead and advance the slides, please. So I don't think I need to convince this audience that unplanned pregnancy is still an enormous problem globally, and that number of 40% of pregnancies being unplanned, while it's inched down a little bit over the past few decades, it's really fairly stagnant in the grand scheme of things, leading to about 85 million unplanned or mistimed pregnancies annually and 56 million abortions, which puts women at risk both for abortions and including the health risks that are associated with unplanned pregnancy. This has economic consequences for both women and for men. And as I think you all are well aware, family planning is the cornerstone of many of the SDG goals in terms of improving quality of life in the developing world. Next slide, please. So why do we think that male-directed contraceptives might be part of the solution here? I think it's really important to remind people that many women cannot use contraceptives. So we still have challenges with access, but there are many women for health reasons that cannot use particularly hormonal methods of contraception. And so we need to expand the choices available to couples to try and meet those needs. In surveys, some of data which I'm going to show you, both men and their partners report that they want this option. There's actually a desire by men to be more included in family planning. And as noted, men are deeply affected by unintended pregnancies, both in terms of the economics and emotional parts of their health. And this is really actually an understudied area, but nonetheless an important one. And of course, in thinking about gender equity, allowing men to participate more fully in contraception is part of gender equity for both parts of the couple. And there's an underlying right for all individuals to control their own fertility. So as Roy mentioned, we think that introducing more male contraceptions could actually be game changers with regards to making a real dent in unplanned pregnancy rates. It's important to note that men actually do participate in contraception, and despite the important introduction of more long-acting methods for women and some increased availability of contraception worldwide, men's participation in contraception has really continued very steadily. About 18% of contraception globally is done by using male-directed methods, despite the fact that there are very limited options. So as Roy mentioned, the only reversible option available to men is the condom. And the condom, as we all know, is a critical part of reproductive health for all individuals, and is a critical part of sexually transmitted disease, of lowering sexually transmitted disease transmission, but it's not a particularly good contraceptive with 14% failure rates. Vasectomies are very, very effective, but not reversible, and certainly not accessible to many individuals across the globe. So there's really a need for more methods, for more options. And if the assumption is that if we had more methods available, there would be increased uptake. And we know that by increasing the menu of options available to women, that has helped to increase uptake of contraceptives. So just as a reminder, our last novel male contraceptive was actually introduced more than 300 years ago, and that was the condom. So really, we're poised for some novel developments in the field. Next slide, please. So the first question one might ask is, if we go to all the trouble of developing these methods, are men really going to use them? And there have been a number of multinational, multi-ethnic studies across the globe asking men if they would be willing to use a novel male contraceptive were it available. And most men would, in fact. So 55% of men in this particular survey said they would certainly use a new male contraceptive if it was available. What kind of contraceptives do men want? Well, that varies across countries and across the globe. But when asked if they would use a male pill, most men, again, across the globe would be willing to use a male pill that would be administered daily. And many men are also very interested in long-acting injections. So methods that mirror what's available for women. Next slide, please. So where are we at here in 2020? There's been about, believe it or not, 50 to 60 years of work already working towards the development of a male hormonal contraceptive, which would be a reversible option for men. There have actually been 6 clinical efficacy trials. So in the field of male hormonal contraceptive development, the pre-efficacy trial work goes on, of course, first in the laboratory, then in animals, and then in men, ensuring that these products have a good safety profile and are effective at lowering sperm concentrations. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So there have been 6 efficacy studies wherein couples have been enrolled in the trial and rely on the method as their method of contraception. These have included regimens that require weekly injections for the male partner, that require 2 injections that may last longer, or a combination of an injection and an implant. And we currently have an ongoing study of a daily gel that the participants apply to their shoulders, and I'll talk about that a little more later. So what we've learned from these studies and all the work that's gone into them is that these methods are very effective, and they are indeed reversible. So in a clinical trial setting wherein the couple is monitored in the trial and is volunteering to participate, these methods are about 95% effective. So very comparable to the in-trial rates of efficacy with female oral contraceptives. So they're very effective. They're entirely reversible. However, we have not actually done a large-scale phase 3 clinical study, which is a study that would probably need to enroll about 5,000 couples. And thus the prediction for one of these methods to get to the market is still about a decade away. Next slide, please. So how does male hormonal contraception work? So there's lots of ways that one can think about making an effective male contraceptive. One could block the production of sperm, which is what hormonal methods do. One could block swimming of the sperm. One could block the actual reaching of the sperm to the egg. So hormonal methods, very similar to female hormonal methods, block the maturation of sperm in the testis. And to put this in perspective, men make about 100 million sperm a day. So this is actually a challenging physiologic problem to block all the production of sperm. To do this, the male hormonal methods work very similarly to female methods. So they block the naturally occurring hormonal loops that occur in men that regulate the production of sperm. Next slide, please. So under normal circumstances, the brain secretes hormones that in women regulate the female menstrual cycle, but in men regulate the production of sperm. These are LH and FSH. LH and FSH go to the testicle, where they regulate the production of both testosterone and ultimately the maturation of sperm. When we give men exogenous testosterone, or testosterone plus a progestin. So again, making the analogy to female methods wherein we are giving women estrogen or estrogen plus a progestin. When we give these hormones to the participant in a study, it blocks the signals from the brain, first GnRH and then FSH and LH, to the testicle. When the testicle does not see the FSH and LH signals, the production of testosterone is blocked. And without that intratesticular high testosterone environment, the maturation of sperm ceases. Importantly, despite blocking the production of testosterone by the person receiving the hormones, we are giving the men testosterone. So all of their other testosterone responsive elements, their secondary sexual characteristics, such as male pattern hair, muscle mass, and sexual drive, are supported by the testosterone or the androgen that we're giving the participants. The addition of the progestin actually increases the effectiveness of the contraceptive by further decreasing the production of sperm. Next slide, please. So the clinical trials to date evaluating male hormonal contraceptives initially were done in conjunction with the WHO. These were international studies, and they initially were done just with testosterone. So in those particular studies where it was demonstrated that these methods were both effective and reversible, the dosing of testosterone that was required was about 2 times the physiologic dose. So the men were receiving quite a bit of testosterone, and as a result, there were side effects associated with giving supraphysiologic doses of testosterone. The side effects included things like acne, some weight gain, and some changes in mood. And there was concern about the long-term administration of high doses of testosterone to men, whether that might lead to increases in things like prostate cancer or cardiovascular disease. So it was, in the context of those studies, it was later recognized that by adding a progestin to the testosterone, as I showed in the last slide, we could more potently suppress the production of sperm. So it's more effective to give both testosterone and a progestin. It also results in more rapid suppression of sperm. So that's actually very important. As you probably know, when we give women, for example, the oral contraceptive pill, it takes a cycle, about a month, to be reliably effective. And because these methods rely upon the suppression of sperm production, they do have on rates that are closer to 6 to 12 weeks because of the biology of the sperm maturation process. So by adding a progestin, those on rates were decreased somewhat. And thirdly, adding a progestin allows for less testosterone to be given in the context of these regimens. So physiologic dosing of testosterone. So the men that would use these methods have testosterone levels that are within the normal range. And that results in fewer side effects and fewer concerns about long-term administration. So those are the regimens that have been tested to date. One of the things that's in the pipeline and is exciting is the concept of modifying an androgen to have both androgenic and progestogenic activities so that we could have a single agent male contraceptive without the requirement for both an androgen and progestin. Next slide, please. So what have been the challenges? We're often asked in the field, why is this taking so long? You guys have been at this for 50 years, and yet we still don't have anything on the market. So just to summarize again, some of the challenges that have plagued the field and that remain. So initial studies had to demonstrate the reversibility of hormonal methods, and we feel that data is very solid. Secondly, I mentioned before that men make millions and millions of sperm every day. And in fact, a normal ejaculate has 15 to 200 million sperm per milliliter. So a lot of the early studies were aimed at determining whether all the sperm had to be removed from the ejaculate or if there was a permissible or threshold level of sperm that was still an effective contraceptive. And that actually took quite a bit of time, and there's a lot of the data from the early efficacy studies informed that those threshold levels. And so now we know that if we can get men's sperm concentrations to less than 1 million sperm per milliliter, so still a lot of sperm, that actually is associated with effective male contraception. A third challenge has been support for these activities. Initial studies were supported by a number of nonprofits, including WHO and the pharmaceutical industry. But there's been a lot of questions about whether men would use these sorts of products and what the regulatory agencies are going to require in terms of safety profiles and long-term data. And that has plagued the field and actually reduced the support from the pharmaceutical industry. And we hope that some of the work that we're doing now demonstrating that these methods are both effective and have few side effects will increase funding for these activities. Lastly, we really want to focus on providing methods that both work but are also user-friendly and what men want. And without a product on the market, it's been very difficult to assess that. And finally, with hormonal methods, there's always questions about side effects. And that really, now that we feel that there's solid data about the effectiveness of these methods, the field is really focused on trying to develop regimens that have very minimal side effects. Next slide, please. So what are the side effects of male hormonal contraceptives that are in development? So some of the things on this slide will look very familiar to all of you because they actually are quite similar to the side effects that some women experience with female hormonal methods. So they can be associated with some modest weight gain. Androgens are stimulators of erythropoiesis. So when men are given androgens, they can have increases in their hematocrit or red blood cell count. There can be mild changes in cholesterol, particularly with orally administered androgens. They can experience mild acne, again, very common in the setting of giving men exogenous androgens. And then there's concern that there may be changes in libido or changes in mood. And these are side effects that we're studying very carefully with validated instruments in ongoing studies developing male hormonal methods. And then another one of the challenges has really been what is acceptable in terms of risk and benefits for these users. So male contraception is rather unique in that the person who's using the method or taking the drug has no direct health benefit from taking it. The prevention of the pregnancy, which is a life-threatening risk for the female partner, is not a direct health consequence for the man. And so it's been difficult to ascertain both what will be acceptable to the user population and what regulatory agencies will find acceptable in terms of side effects and these risk-benefit equations. Next slide, please. So what are we doing now? So it's actually very exciting. We have a multinational study underway, an efficacy study of a male contraceptive gel that is applied daily. So this gel contains both testosterone and a novel progestin, nesterone, which may have be associated with fewer side effects because it's a very pure progestin. It doesn't have any androgenic or anti-androgenic activity, glucocorticoid activity, or estrogenic activity. So the idea here is that there'll be fewer off-target effects with the use of nesterone in contrast to some other progestins. And again, it does contain testosterone, and the formulation is very similar to formulations of testosterone gels that are currently approved and on the market for the treatment of low testosterone in men. So the goal here is to lower the side effect profile or minimize it as much as possible. And in contrast to the other methods that have reached the efficacy phase, which have been injections and implants, this is the first time that a self-administered male contraceptive has been evaluated. So as I mentioned, the men that are in the partners that are in this study squirt the gel on their hands, and they rub it onto their shoulders every day and wash their hands thereafter. The use of these shorter acting daily hormonal preparations we think may accelerate the recovery after discontinuation. So again, all these methods are reversible, but it does take between 4 and 12 weeks for men's sperm concentrations to go back to normal after discontinuation. And so we believe that these shorter acting methods may shorten that to closer to the 4 to 8 week range. So as I said, the study is underway. It's actually very exciting. This is the first time that a male hormonal contraceptive study has had a site in Africa. So we have a site in Nairobi, as well as sites in Europe and the United States and Chile. Next slide, please. So this is just some of the preliminary data from men using the Nestrone testosterone gel, and it just shows you a number of the concepts of male hormonal contraception. So on the x-axis are weeks, and on the y-axis is the sperm concentration. And you may recall that I mentioned the critical threshold value for effective male hormonal contraception is to reach a sperm concentration of less than 1 million per mil. So you can see there's a line there that demarcates that. So the men start off with sperm concentrations between 15 and 200 million per milliliter at time 0. And in the yellow and the blue lines, you can see the individuals who used the Nestrone and testosterone gel every day. And by 8 weeks, their sperm concentrations have almost uniformly reached that 1 million per milliliter threshold, a threshold which is maintained until 24 weeks when they discontinued the drug. And then you can see that their sperm concentrations very nicely come back in about 8 weeks. In this particular study, 90% of the subjects, of the participants, suppressed their sperm concentration to this threshold level. And with this gel, we saw very, very minimal side effects. So approximately 2 kilograms of weight gain, really no changes in cholesterol, no changes in mood or libido as they were assessed in this particular trial. So this gel has a very promising side effect profile and looks to be very effective. So the study, as I mentioned, is currently underway, sponsored by NICHD and the Population Council, who has developed Nestrone. We currently have about 120 couples enrolled across the globe, including 7 in Kenya, and about 50% of them have reached the stage in the study where they're using the gel as their only method of contraception. So that's the efficacy phase. And we've had about a 10% discontinuation rate, which is to be expected. We hope to enroll 420 couples, so we're about a quarter of the way through enrollment, and we project that the study will be finished in 2022 or 2023, with the hope that the COVID epidemic does not interrupt these efforts. So that's our ongoing study. Again, it's the first study that's being done in Africa, and it's the first self-administered product. But what else do we have in the pipeline? Next slide, please. So that's a gel. One of the things, as I mentioned, that's important is to develop methods that we think men would be willing to use and their partners would also find acceptable. And we ask men what their preference is in a hypothetical situation. Many men would like a daily pill, and many men are interested in longer acting injections, similar to methods that are available to women. Next slide, please. So NICHD is very interested in developing novel androgens. So these are androgens that are use testosterone as the building block and are then modified to have both androgenic activity and progestogenic activity. So the concept here is, instead of giving 2 hormones to men, could we build those activities into one molecule? And so there's 2 compounds, 2 steroids that have been developed and that are in testing in men that look to have those appropriate characteristics. So what are the advantages? Why put everything in one molecule? Well, when we give testosterone and a progestin, we have to understand the pharmacokinetics, the delivery, and the pharmacodynamics of each of the compounds individually, so it can actually become complex. It's been incredibly challenging to develop oral testosterone that can be used both safely and only requires once-a-day dosing. So these novel androgens have the potential for oral delivery. Conceptually, they may have fewer side effects, and the manufacture of a single agent may both simplify the process and be more economical in the long run. Next slide. So you may have heard that there's been some progress in developing a male pill. So that is one of these dual action androgens called dimethandrolone undecanoate, or DMAU. So where we are with this particular product is that we've tested it in men for 1 month, and those results have been very promising. So as I mentioned, delivering androgens orally has been challenging in terms of safety, as oral testosterone has been associated with liver toxicity. So this novel androgen dimethandrolone does not have any liver toxicity in men. It appears to be effective in changing the hormonal profile in men by blocking the production of both LH, FSH, and testosterone, which is exactly the hormonal changes we would expect to see in something that will be effective as a male contraceptive. In terms of side effects, in a short 1 month study, there was some mild weight gain and changes in cholesterol, but really nothing else that was a considerable safety marker. We asked the subjects, we're very focused on understanding mood and libido. There may have been some mild changes in libido in a couple of the subjects. And so in the longer term study that we've just completed, a 3 month study, those are being assessed very carefully. So, so dimethandrolone is very promising as a potential male pill, and we have an analogous steroid also in development that works very similarly. So we've completed a 3 month study. We hope to have those results published by the end of the year. And then the next step would be to do a 6 month study and then hopefully do a study in couples. Next slide, please. And then finally, we're developing dimethandrolone and its sister compound as a long-acting injection. So the concept here is to develop something that's a Depo-Provera for men, if you will. So a single action steroid that could be administered every 3 to 6 months that would provide reversible contraception for men. So this particular product is in phase 1 study, both here at the University of Washington and at the Lundquist Institute at UCLA. We've enrolled about 100 men. So this has been dose finding in that we gave very, very small doses initially and have gradually increased the dosing. And those results are unpublished, but I can tell you that it's been very exciting to see the hormonal changes and the lack of side effects in the men who have been receiving these longer acting injections. We are very optimistic that we can develop these injections to be given in this sort of a time frame to men. Next slide, please. So in summary, male hormonal contraceptive development has been ongoing for about 50 years, but we feel like there's been some major developments in the last 5 years. All that work has demonstrated that these methods can be very effective and that they are entirely reversible. We are continuing to work to minimize side effects. And I will point out that while there are some side effects, these are quite mild, and most of the participants in the studies do not find them disturbing. And we have very few dropouts associated with side effects, at least in the clinical trials to date. There's ongoing work to try and understand acceptability in the studies that we do. The participants find the methods to be very acceptable, and they almost uniformly say that they would use these methods if they were available on the market. So that's a skewed group, but nonetheless encouraging that the actual users are finding these methods to be acceptable. We'd like to develop a menu of options for men, just as there are for women, so injections, pills, and gels, and we hope to make them accessible. And as I said, we project about 10 years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was extremely interesting, and our second presenter is Dr. Logan Nickels, who is director of, have they heard me before? Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Page. Our second presenter is Dr. Logan Nickels, who is Director of Operations and Programs at the Male Contraceptive Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing technology and research in the field of male reproductive health. He's been successful in raising funds and serves as a media figure and has a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Oklahoma. So over to you, Logan.
Thanks, Roy, and thanks to the organizers for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. I think Dr. Page did a great job of introducing the need for male contraception and kind of what's known, preliminary data about the understanding of acceptance of them. So I'll kind of jump into talking about future methods of non-hormonal male contraception and what's coming down the pipeline that hasn't yet been tested in the clinical setting. Next slide, please. I think the most obvious place to start here is somewhere that's very familiar to most people, and that's vasectomy. And of course, vasectomy provides contraception for men by occluding sperm transport. Sperm are produced in the testes, transported out through the vas deferens and out of the male reproductive tract. And vasectomy is, of course, the severing of the vas deferens and essentially cutting off the channel by which sperm are transported. So that's kind of the most familiar way to approach this. And what's known about vasectomy now is, despite being one of two male methods, vasectomy and condoms, despite vasectomy having a very high efficacy rate, it has a comparatively low uptake rate as compared to tubal ligation, female sterilization procedure, which is riskier and far more involved. This kind of makes vasectomy and male contraceptives part of a gender equality issue and getting men more involved in reproductive health and family planning, a domain that in some cases is thought of as the domain of women. Vasectomy really has some acceptability barriers, barriers to its uptake, one of which is awareness. Awareness of vasectomy is the lowest by far of all the highly effective methods. And that knowledge, when it exists, is fraught with myths and misconceptions, some of which include that vasectomy can be castration or that it makes men weak. Other barriers include that men seek routine healthcare less frequently than women and have comparatively less familiarity with the health system. And then within the health system, providers themselves often have poor knowledge or bias against vasectomy and recommend against it sometimes. Furthermore, I think the largest barrier for vasectomy in general is that reversibility is not guaranteed, and providers rightfully caution against it as a non-permanent method. However, despite all of that, vasectomy is a fairly prevalent method in developed countries. Canada has a uptake rate of about 24%, and then other countries like Australia, the United Kingdom, Korea, the United States, they all have high uptake, but most of them actually still have higher rates of female sterilization. And then, of course, in developing regions, especially in the continent of Africa, their rates approaching 0.0%. In fact, in developing regions, only 1 in 11 users of permanent methods rely on vasectomy, even though it's simpler to perform, it's less invasive, it's safer, it's more cost effective. So there are many ways by which we can increase knowledge and demand of vasectomy, but one way that we can promote vasectomy as a whole is to remove the permanence from it and rely on occluding sperm transport still as a concept, as a mechanism of male contraception, but by removing the permanent piece of the equation. Next slide, please. So one way that we can think about that is reversible vas-occlusive devices. These are devices in development that are conceptually very similar to vasectomy. They can block the flow of sperm through that channel of the vas deferens, or they can manipulate sperm and remove sperm functions in there. So principally, vas-occlusion is the injection of a substance or a device into the vas deferens that prevents sperm from either reaching their final destination or gaining the capability to fertilize an egg. It's probably going to be a procedure similar to vasectomy in a lot of cases, percutaneous or conventional vasectomy. And the benefits, first and foremost, of these reversible vas-occlusive devices is in the name, it's reversibility. In some cases, these devices may have benefits above and beyond that for users maybe seeking permanent contraception, such as simplified procedures or a shorter recovery time. But reversibility is really going to be the biggest piece that attracts new users to these devices. These also have a benefit above and beyond adding to the method mix, in that their advantage above drug-based methods is that they will be regulated as devices more than likely, which is a shorter regulatory pathway, getting products on the market sooner. Some of these could be in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 years, but that's none of these methods are yet to enter clinicals. When it comes down to it, this is also providing a new method that does fit into the method mix. This will be engaging men in a way that they're semi-familiar with and bringing them into the fold, into the method mix with a LARC. Dr. Page mentioned creating a menu of options that work for men and women. This would be something akin to an IUD for men, something that has very long-acting mechanism that men could rely on for years of contraceptive efficacy. However, they aren't without their challenges. There's, of course, would be the requirement of provider, a particular challenge in developing regions. You have to undergo a surgical procedure or an outpatient procedure in a surgical setting, and that involves surgery within a delicate tissue, something men might find acceptability barriers towards. And then when it comes down to it, the reversibility of vas-occlusive devices is their largest benefit, but it's also a potential challenge. The vas is a very delicate tissue, and reversibility has yet to be demonstrated in humans. Next slide, please. I did want to call out some specific vas-occlusive methods in here, specifically ones that are in development and being developed by companies. So I'll talk briefly about Reversibly, which is a hydrogel polymer. It recently received approval by Indian regulatory authorities. And then it has a licensed partner, Vasogel. They propose that there's a second injection to reverse Vasogel or Reversibly. But notably, that reversibility, I mentioned that it's approved in India, that reversibility is not part of that approval. They propose a 5-year efficacy and mixed mechanism of action by which sperm are both rendered ineffective, as well as the prevention of the transport of sperm. But demonstrating reversibility, of course, is very important for these methods to really gain traction and attract new users. Another one is an American startup, Contraline. They're working on a product, Echo VR, or sometimes known as Atom. And it's similar conceptually in Vasogel, that it's a polymeric compound that's injected in the vas deferens. And they propose reversibility where the compound degrades over time and restoring fertility, and subsequent injections could continue a contraceptive effect. A very different approach would be a Danish company. They're working on a stent-like device that's inserted into the urethra. This may have some acceptability concerns above and beyond vas-occlusion and doing surgery within the scrotal area, but just to say that it's another administration procedure and something that can provide a diverse array of options. Other methods that people have been thinking about, some of these are dead or not really feasible at the moment, but conceptually should give you an idea of what's possible and what people have been thinking about, are injections of things like polyurethane elastomers, medical grade silicone, an intravas device called the SHUG, and then one particularly interesting one that's not predicted to make any large strides in development, but is interesting, is the BMEC SLV, which is a literal physical switch that the flow of sperm can be flipped on and off at the user's discretion. This is a complicated concept, both to design and implement, but just to say that future methods could include things like this, wherein there's more control over fertility and more of a kind of a future direction. Maybe it could be controlled on your phone. Maybe it could be something that's implanted. This is something that is being thought about. Next slide, please. Outside of devices, there are non-steroidal methods that are being developed as drugs. And briefly, because these methods are so far away, these methods are not in clinical trials right now. These are all in preclinical development. I wanted to talk more about the mechanisms of action and give you an idea of the sort of drugs that may result from targeting different pieces of the male reproductive timeline. Methods that focus on this, new drugs that are being developed for non-hormonal male contraceptives, are likely in the 15 to 20 year time frame. And just like any drug development, regardless of targeting specific processes within male reproduction, specificity will be an issue and safety will be an issue. Ensuring that drugs are developed that target very specific male reproductive processes and don't have off-target effects, that will be a difficulty. So we have to be thoughtful about the targets that are chosen, choose targets that are expressed only in male tissues as much as possible, and to be careful about drug developments. Because when it comes down to it, male contraceptives, drug-based male contraceptives, will likely have to be safer and more efficacious than almost any other therapeutic area. We'll be treating healthy men for a very long time, and when it comes down to it, the efficacy will not be something that's easily compromised on. But to go into detail, so targeting spermatogenesis is a means of creating a male contraceptive. The hormonal methods that Dr. Page talked about inhibit the creation of new sperm production, and we can do that in non-hormonal ways as well. Though that said, those methods that rely on the targeting of sperm production will be similar to hormonal methods in that they'll have an onset time, an on time where men will have to take the drug for weeks, potentially months before their sperm counts drop to 0. And then of course there'll need to be semen analysis to confirm these sperm counts dropping 0 or at a level suitable for contraceptive efficacy. There'll also be a time to return for fertility similar to the hormonal methods. This area is well established scientifically, and there are lots of preclinical projects, but again, preclinical. There's also sperm transport, which can be targeted via drug-based mechanism. I'll talk about that here in just a second and an example, but outside of the vas-occlusives to prevent sperm transport, it's kind of a small field. One can also target sperm motility as a means of male contraception, and as well as fertilization, downstream effects that occur outside of the male reproductive tract. This is a very interesting idea, one, because one can inhibit sperm functions like motility and fertilization as sperm develop in the male tract. One can also inhibit them in the female tract as they gain the ability to become motile and fertilize an egg. This results in a couple of interesting ideas, potentially dual user contraceptives, as well as the potential for on-demand or precoital contraceptives. But just to say that, again, with all of these, we are very far away from actually creating drugs to be tested in humans, much less demonstrating these things in men. Next slide, please. To call out a couple of specific targets and projects in the area of non-hormonal male contraception, just to give you an idea of the sort of things that are happening. Within spermatogenesis and sperm maturation, things like retinoic acid, both its biosynthesis and antagonism of its cognate receptor, those are areas of potential targets for male contraception for non-hormonal methods. There's also the maturation of sperm in the epididymis, and then thermal treatment is one method. So sperm are best created at a temperature slightly below that of basal body temperature, and heating the testes in a way that prevents sperm production is a known, proven method of male contraception, but does have acceptability issues and is somewhat burdensome for users. Within sperm transport, there are methods drug-based to try and prevent the contraction of the smooth muscle tissue, the vas deferens. That would prevent sperm from being transported from the testes and out and through the male reproductive tract. There are precedents for this. Flomax or tamsulosin is a drug that is known to cause retrograde ejaculation in men, and combining that with a potential purina receptor inhibitor may result in some form of male contraception that you may have heard of called the clean sheets pill. There are also targets downstream that I mentioned for sperm motility and fertilization, such as sperm energetics, ion channels, things that allow them to become motile and swim or penetrate the zona pellucida of the egg. And one project that I want to call out in particular here is EPIN. EPIN is probably the furthest along non-hormonal male contraceptive, and there's data in non-human primates to support its development. They are preclinical, as with all these methods, but suffice it to say they are one of the furthest along as far as getting towards that IND and first-in-man studies. Next slide, please. So thinking about all of these methods being very far away. That's both a challenge and an opportunity. And we think about how we might learn from existing methods, male and female. This allows us to set the groundwork for men to be more engaged in contraception, for us to bring people into the fold now, and set the stage such that when these methods actually hit the market in 10 years or so, we can have best chances for success, make men literate in male contraception. Ways that we can do that are to promote vasectomy here and now. Promoting no scalpel vasectomy includes getting men more involved in contraception, getting them literate in the conversation. We can promote them, educate men, increase its availability, and do things like include insurance coverage in the Affordable Care Act. That's in the American-based system, as well as we can think about international settings and how we might ensure that users have the most access to them. Market research, understanding what men think they want and what their partners think they want, is a way that we can increase the understanding of men and their relationship to contraception. And then, of course, education, advocacy, using social and traditional media, direct outreach to bring people into the fold and make them literate in contraceptives. Finally, then promotion within important stakeholders. Young researchers are very important, ensuring that there's a pipeline of development, both in terms of products as well as the people researching those products. But then thinking about youth in general, the general populace, because when it comes down to it, if these methods are 10 years away, the users of the future are not yet contraceptive users. The users of the future are preteens right now. And so thinking about the attitudes and opinions of today's youth will probably inform us more as we come towards product development than the users that are currently out there. Because as we know, there have been massive changes in how people relate to each other as well as with their contraceptive use in recent years. So that's all from me. Back to you, Roy.
Thank you very much, Logan. These have been two very stimulating presentations, and we've had some great questions come through. We're a bit short on time, so we're going to dive right in. I want to reassure the audience that if they have to leave, all the slide sets are going to be shared and that the speakers can stay on till 10:15. So Dr. Fariel Fikri is going to share some questions from you, and probably in the interest of time, Fariel, just direct them to who you think is best.
Hi, Fariel. Can you please just unmute yourself? Thanks.
Yep, I did that. Can everyone hear me? Marin?
Yes,
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So good morning, good afternoon, and for some it might be somewhat late at night, but I'm so excited and thrilled that you're all online for this wonderful presentations by Dr. Page and Dr. Logan. The first question, and I was wondering when it would come up, but it definitely did, was related to gender issues. So, and basically this question is directed to you, Dr. Page. It reflects on the testosterone physiological doses that is being tested at the moment. So the question relates to, can you comment if the studies also are looking at its impact on behavior, that is aggression, rage, increase in intimate partner violence, discord? Dr. Page?
Yes, so that's a great question. So remember that it's been an important goal of developing these products to keep the testosterone levels in the normal range. So if we look at data from men who use testosterone for other reasons, it's the issues about aggression have been difficult to study and really have been associated with testosterone levels that are far above the normal range. So, so we don't think that these products will have those effects. That does not mean that that should not be studied. And so we do mood questionnaires to look at that. In the context of the current study, we we give both the male and the female partners questionnaires regarding acceptability. Some of those questions address issues of mood, the perceptions of mood by the female partner of the male. But as we move forward in the field and we have more enrollees in these trials, that's a critical piece to address more deeply.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Logan. And it's an interesting question, but from a slightly different aspect. So Logan, for you, why is the development of male contraceptive methods that addresses sperm motility more complicated or slower to progress than hormonal methods that affect sperm maturation?
That's a great question. So Dr. Page spoke about the decades of work that went into understanding the relationship between sperm concentration and actual fertility. And there hasn't been the same level of work being put into the relationship between sperm motility and fertility. So what level of sperm motility results in a contraceptive effect? We're not really sure. This is complicated by the fact that sperm remain viable in the female reproductive tract for some amount of time, potentially measured in days after ejaculation. And so the contraceptives that are created will have to ensure that their contraceptive effect lasts through that period. And it's really unknown at this point in terms of humans what level is required and what sort of efficacy is needed. So that does complicate the situation and requires some groundwork to be laid, but they do have an overall benefit to users in that we could be looking at on-demand contraceptives as well as contraceptives that increase the method mix for both men and women.
Thanks a lot, Logan. I just see that it is already a tad bit after 10 o'clock. So if those of you who need to leave, please do so, but we will be extending the Q&A session to 10:15. Our speakers have very graciously agreed to stay on till 10:15. The next question is now directed both to Stephanie as well as Logan, because it looks at regulatory mechanisms that are in place. Okay. And the challenges that it's facing and why this would be different than other hormonal contraceptives for women. Stephanie, first to you.
Sure. So one of the issues is that when we get products through regulatory approval, this is new territory. So adding new methods for women, there's a regulatory pathway that's already been paved. And so what's necessary to get approval is known. So that's one issue. The second one is really about who benefits and risk benefit. So while I think there's acceptance that contraceptives they have benefits for a society. The actual health benefit for a male user of a contraceptive is more difficult to define. So for a woman, you're preventing pregnancy, a life-threatening condition. In a man, if the woman gets pregnant, it doesn't actually affect his health. Now, there's a paucity of data about the mental health and long-term economic consequences for men of unplanned pregnancy, but nonetheless, that's really the issue. So regulatory bodies have been very hesitant to sort of map out what kinds of studies are going to be required to get these things to market because of that uncertainty around risk benefit.
Logan?
Sure. I think that was pretty comprehensive. I can add on to say that, there are ways in which we can start to think about this conversation and understand the relationship of risk benefit within couples. So that is to say that, maybe we could consider that risk accrued by the male user mitigates a subsequent risk of pregnancy and its associated health risks in the female user. And that could be one way to approach risk benefit from a regulatory perspective. We do face those challenges in that these contraceptives will be treating men, likely young men, and used chronically for a very long time. And so that is a barrier as far as safety. And then, of course, efficacy. Will male contraceptives need to beat the condom's efficacy? The only other non-permanent male method at 85%? Or will it need to beat something like the female pill at greater than 98%? These things aren't really known. And it's important to think about how we can add to the method mix and bring new methods to light, while at the same time not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Thanks a lot, Logan, for that. That's really interesting. Now, with regard and following up on the regulatory concerns, this other question deals much more with the manufacturers. And again, it's directed both to Stephanie and Logan. What have the conversations with manufacturers been like, and which manufacturers are engaged? Logan, first to you.
To my knowledge, manufacturers are generally unengaged to date. And that's in both male and female contraception. I think that there's a current environment where manufacturers are generally, speaking of traditional pharma, they're interested in de-risking projects, and there's a perceived risk with male contraception, both in its development as well as in its marketing and eventual usage. So I think that largely manufacturers have sat on the sidelines, but personally, I haven't had any conversations with manufacturers to know what those next steps might look like, especially given that most of our funding and our focus is in far future methods.
Thanks, Logan. Stephanie, any other thoughts?
So the pharmaceutical industry was engaged about 20 years ago and has become disengaged, as Logan mentioned, for a variety of probably financial reasons and perceived risk and unknowns in the market. The only other thing I would add to his comments are that, I think the biggest the likelihood of the pharmaceutical industry getting re-engaged is really going to be about product demand. So social norms are changing. Young people have quite a bit of interest in contraceptive methods, and issues of gender equity and who's responsible for contraception are changing. So what we would hope is that the pharmaceutical industry and manufacturing industry will see that there's demand for additional products and find that appealing as a market. But right now, we are entirely sponsored by NICHD and other NGOs.
Great. Thanks a lot. This question is also directed to both Stephanie and Logan, but for Stephanie, it's much more related from the perspective of hormonal methods, and for Logan, it's much more directed on the context of non-hormonal methods. And the question is, and this is a cause of concern, I think, for many of us, what about understanding what men fears most with male contraception and addressing those fears and concerns? Stephanie, hormonal methods.
Sure. So I think that, men are concerned about their masculinity, and that's defined by individuals in different ways and culturally in different ways. But I think there's a misconception that contraception and castration are synonymous. And so part of this is really about education and understand and trying to communicate the notion that sperm are not the same thing as testosterone, and masculinity is not, just like femininity is not about ovulating every month. Masculinity is not about having sperm in your ejaculate, but that it's really about trying to understand. We need more understanding really of what men's fears are, and education. And this is part of that whole equation of getting more survey data, having more in-depth interviews with men, and really trying to understand what their fears are, because there isn't a lot known about that. And some of this is really just garnered from the participants in these studies and the people who decide not to participate. So lots of work to be done in that area.
Great. Logan?
Yeah, I'll echo what Dr. Page said there. That's the resolution of data in this area isn't great. And there's a lot to be understood about acceptability of men, and why, I think it's just as important to know why men are interested in male contraceptives as it is to understand why they're not. And I think that what we do know, Dr. Page mentioned, masculinity, and I think side effects are a big piece of that. Men are concerned about side effects that decrease their virility, their libido. And I think that they're also concerned about minor side effects, things that they're familiar with, that they see their female partners go through, and they would like to avoid that if at all possible. And so I think that understanding the tolerance of men for those specific side effects is very important. And overall, assessing the understanding of men and the contraceptives that are out there, as well as for future methods, could allow us to really understand more about this space in general.
If I might add also, and I know many people on this webinar are working on programs, the whole socio-cultural aspect about is contraception and family planning women's work is a difficult one to balance the scales on. So in the gender domain and that's also something that has been worked on but requires a lot of ongoing work.
I should jump in one more thing to say too, that this is not all men are the same. If we're thinking about the world population of 3.8 whatever billion men, what appeals to some men may be different than what appeals to others, and there are cultural norms to consider. There are individualistic notions to consider. There's a lot going on, and so in terms of what may prevent men from accepting male contraception and what their fears may be, we could be looking at a very broad spectrum that's not one product will appeal to all users for that reason.
Great. Thanks a lot. There's another question, and I think this looks at the issue of male methods more from a woman's perspective. The question is, and this is again directed to both Stephanie, you, and Logan. Could you please talk about this aspect of acceptability? Will women accept men's using it? It's around the issue of trust, gender equality, etc. And also relates to what Roy spoke about a bit earlier today. Logan, you first.
Sure. So, I think that there's data out there to support that women would trust their male partners in using male contraception. I think some of the data shows upwards of 90%. And that's to be expected, right? You would trust your partner to take out the garbage every day, or to take a pill every day, or to use a contraceptive method. And I think when we're talking about monogamous relationships, that's very typical, is that there's a high degree of partner trust. And then I think that when we're talking about non-monogamous relationships, sexual encounters that are not frequently occurring, or new relationships, there may not be that degree of partner trust. And in that case, I think that this is about ensuring autonomy in these sort of relationships, ensuring that men and women both have their contraceptive options that they can rely on to ensure them reproductive autonomy until they reach a degree of trust in the relationships where they can decide which single option works for them, or if continuing to use two methods may be the best option. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is that there's a high degree of trust and among women and their male partners in monogamous relationships, and there is belief that women will accept men using it in those situations. And then in other situations, it's going to be very user dependent and very relationship dependent.
Stephanie?
That's a very comprehensive answer. I would just echo that there have been surveys in couples, and the trust issue is very high in that context. But different products for different situations. And so again, this is just meant to add to what we already have available for women. And so I think that's really the way to think about it. And so it will work for some couples, won't work for others. The couples in our studies, it's really a couple study. It's not just the man, and the women are very engaged in reminding their partners and trying to ensure that they're both protected. So this, different products for different people.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm just looking at the time, and it's 10:14. So we do have one question, and that's the last question. And I think it's really the tip of the iceberg for male contraceptives. And again, it's directed to both of you. The question is, do all this data show that we now need a major focus on male attitudes, knowledge, and practices supporting vasectomy, or for that matter, other newer male-led methods? Stephanie, you first, please.
Sorry, actually, can you have Logan take the question first? I'm sorry.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I do think that there should be a focus on understanding male attitudes around vasectomy and other methods. I think that we've reached a point, times are changing in terms of intergender relationships, and the context of men and women in reproduction has changed. Men are willing to become more engaged fathers, more engaged partners in the area of sexual and reproductive health. And I think that understanding their attitudes and opinions in the area of contraception as it exists today with vasectomy, and in terms of what could exist in the future, could really pave the way towards a more holistic understanding of what they want to perform, how they want to participate. And there's really not been that focus in the past that I think would be beneficial in the future. So suffice to say, yes, I think a focus on men in reproductive health in general would help to fill that gap that has existed over the past since forever about what men think they know and what they want out of reproductive health.
Great. Thanks a lot. Stephanie, do you want me to repeat the question again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a brief interruption. I had to.
No, I can but imagine, in these times, and with your position that you hold at the hospital there in Seattle. The question is, do all this data show that we now need a major focus on male attitudes, knowledge, and practices? The question was related to supporting vasectomy, but I'm broadening that question to new hormonal male methods.
I think we absolutely do. There is some data from, for example, from the Malawi Men's Project that actually shows that increasing men's participation in female methods, let alone in male methods, increases uptake and use. And so there's really a knowledge gap, a lack of understanding about men's attitudes, and especially men's attitudes now. We have what the information we have is mostly from 20, 25 years ago, and times are changing very fast. And so I think there's a huge area that we need to exploit in terms of understanding what men want, what they feel, and how to engage them both for male products, but also to improve method uptake everywhere. So really important.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think we have now come to the end of our Q&A sessions, and it's over to you, Roy, for your closing remarks.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll just take the liberty of, on behalf of the Method Choice Community of Practice, E2A, USAID, all of us in the audience and the international family planning community, actually, to thank both speakers for such a stimulating presentation. I would point out that Dr. Page got up at 5 to be on this. So a special thanks to her, 5 in the morning. And this event will be recorded. The slides will be shared. We'll follow up with the questions that we weren't able to answer. And I believe that the interest in this general area will generate more opportunities to continue this discussion. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.